Welcome into OutKick the show. I am your fearless leader, Clay Travis. This is the last OutKick the show of 2024. Almost forgot what year it was there. I hope all of you are getting ready for a Merry Christmas, a Happy Hanukkah, a spectacular holiday season for anyone out there. I will be back on January 2nd. Which is a Thursday, the day after all of the quarterfinal college football playoff games will take place. Be back here with OutKick, and probably we will do the fade as well. We're going to do a fade right after this show. We're going to tape it. I'm not sure when they're going to put it up, but it should be a good discussion of NFL Week 17, and also because remember we got games coming up in 2 days because we've got the Christmas Day NFL games that are going to be on Netflix. So appreciate all of you. I will dive into all the games in a moment, but first, make your holidays bigger and brighter with Prize Picks. Best place to get real money action while watching your favorite sports. Prize Picks, best way to get in all the sports action. Over 30 states, California, Texas, Florida, Georgia. If you're feeling left out, you can win up to 1,000 times your money on Prize Picks. Make your picks less than 60 seconds. Turn your sports opinions into real money all season long on Prize Picks. And join now because this holiday season, Prize Picks is giving away 2 free picks in December, and they're giving away $30+ million in rewards during Pixmas. Download the app today. Use code OutKick for $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Again, code OutKick for $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks, run your game. All right. I have been ecstatic for a generation. I started writing online in 2004. I have been advocating for an expanded college football playoff for 20 years now. Having said that, Saturday, Friday night games stunk. From the moment Indiana kicked off against Notre Dame, got destroyed, SMU obliterated by Penn State, Clemson pretty solidly beaten by Texas, and then Tennessee no-showed against Ohio State and got wrecked. All 4 games were bad. I'm going to get into all 4 of those games, what we learned, if anything. But what I will say is this confirms what I've been arguing since the college football playoff was laid out in this 12-team manner. It made 0 sense to give buys to only teams that won conference championships. Arizona State didn't deserve a bye. Boise State did not deserve a bye. They should have seeded 1 to 12. If they had done that, then your matchups would have been, I think, way better on Saturday and Sunday. In fact, this is what it would have looked like if you didn't give buys to Boise State and Arizona State. You would have had Notre Dame hosting Clemson. I think that would have been a much more interesting game. You would have had Ohio State hosting Arizona State. I think Ohio State would have had an even easier go of it, frankly. But that would give a reward to Notre Dame and Ohio State. Tennessee would have hosted SMU. I think Tennessee would have won in Neyland Stadium that game. And Indiana would have played against Boise State. That one would have been a toss-up to me, but Indiana would have hosted Boise State. So you would have had Oregon, Georgia, Texas, and Penn State all getting buys. I think that's what should have happened. And then, in my opinion, you would have had Notre Dame, Ohio State, Tennessee, and I'll give Indiana the nod here. I think Indiana at home would have won. And then your top 8 this weekend would be number 1 Oregon against number 8 Indiana. It would have been number 2 Georgia against number 7 Tennessee. You would have gotten number 3 Texas against number 6 Ohio State. And you would have gotten Penn State against Notre Dame. All 4 of those games would have been better. I think also you would have had better, more competitive opening round games. Now, they screwed that up So as a result, you've got Penn State as a double-digit favorite against Boise State, who got a bye. You've got Texas as nearly a 2-touchdown favorite against Arizona State, who got a bye. Ohio State is your 8 seed. They're actually favored over Oregon. That's a sign that, by the way, you got this wrong. Ohio State is the best of the advancing teams. Georgia, 2.5-point favorite over Notre Dame. So 3 of the 4 lower-seeded teams are favored over the higher-seeded teams. The only team that is actually favored in their game is Georgia, and they're a small favorite over Notre Dame. And the reason that's a small line is because Georgia is going to be without Carson Beck. So I think they got all this wrong, okay? In the offseason, if you want to guarantee a conference champion a spot, fine, the Big 12 champ automatically gets in, ACC, SEC, Big 10, all of those, plus on a non-Power 5 conference, that's fine. But I would actually use the existing, then reseed 1 to 12. That is, actually rank them and give the 4 byes to the 4 best teams, regardless of which conference they have to come from or whether they won a conference championship. Again, this year, I think number 1 seed should have been Oregon, 2 Georgia, 3 Texas, 4 Penn State. I think that should have been the 4 byes. Again, in my always humble opinion, I think they screwed this up. Okay, what did we learn? Indiana, in my opinion, was not one of the 12 best teams in college football. And this, again, people are like, oh, how can you say that? Like, no, this is pretty clear, okay? There is a balancing act every year between best and most deserving. This happened when there were 4 teams. It's still going to happen when there are 12 teams. Indiana would be, I believe, on a neutral site, an underdog against Alabama, Ole Miss, and maybe South Carolina as well. Doesn't mean Indiana's not good, just means that I don't believe Indiana is one of the 12 best teams. I think the College Football Playoff Committee leaned on the side of most deserving instead of best in that respect. I don't think SMU is. Now, same argument that I made before, SMU versus Alabama was the final battle, right? Final decision. I said this, I tweeted it. I think Alabama on a neutral site field would beat SMU 6 or 7 times out of 10, okay? I think that's the reality. But I also think Alabama was not one of the most deserving teams, right? I think Alabama's better than SMU, but they lost on the road at Alabama. They lost on the road at Oklahoma. So when the committee was analyzing best versus most deserving, they decided to go with most deserving over better. That was their decision. I understand why they made that choice, but I do believe Alabama would have been far more competitive at Penn State than SMU was. But again, I also think Alabama did this to themselves. All they had to do was split with Alabama and Oklahoma. Let me also just say, with Vanderbilt and Oklahoma. Let me also say this. In most sports, we don't just look at wins and losses. We also consider the quality of the opposition. The SEC is the best conference in football, period. You can argue against me. You will be wrong. How do I know this? Because of the last 20 years, okay? The data is pretty strong. The SEC teams have not only won overwhelming numbers of championships, they have also sent more players into the NFL. If you have more championships and you have better players, that means that you are a better conference, okay? Doesn't mean that you're always going to win every game, but historically, the SEC over the last 20 years has been the best conference in football. Now, if you want to argue NIL is going to change that, that's an argument you can make. There isn't the evidence really to support that being true yet. Maybe it will be true going forward. We will see whether that ends up being the case or not. But for the last 20 years, the SEC has indisputably been the best when it comes to championships, when it comes to head-to-head matchups, and when it comes to sending players to the NFL. So if you win championships, if you win an overwhelming majority of head-to-head matchups, and if you also consistently, for like the last 15 years, I think it is, have sent more players into the NFL, both raw numbers and on a per capita basis, how else would you define where the best conference is? This is not a arguable proposition based on past history. If you want to argue going forward, you can potentially argue that. Now, Tennessee got whipped by Ohio State. Before we analyze the game itself, credit to Tennessee for sending tens of thousands of fans to Columbus. They bought up the season tickets of many Ohio State Buckeye fans. Now, the AD, coaches, they've been coming after me on Twitter. Some of you have seen this. I think that's not unintelligent by them. In other words, it's smart of them, because you want to try to detract from the inner turmoil of your program, and you want to find a common foe on the outside. All I said was Tennessee bought tens of thousands of tickets to Ohio State. That's an objective reality. Who did they buy those tickets from? Ohio State season ticket holders. When your top donor and season ticket holders are selling tickets, it's not a great vote of confidence for your head coach, okay? Now, I saw this myself. When I wrote on Rocky Top, which was my book about about Tennessee and the last year of Phil Fulmer, that was the 2008 college football season. When I wrote that, I talked with then athletic director Mike Hamilton after the season was over. And I said, how did you make the decision to fire Phil Fulmer? And he said, when Alabama came to Knoxville in 2008, and I looked up into the stadium for that game, and I saw that so many of our top donors had sold tickets to Alabama fans. That is, Alabama fans weren't just sitting in their allotted seats that were sold. They weren't just sitting in the upper deck. They were sitting in some of the best donor seats in the stadium. That meant season ticket holders were selling their tickets for one of the biggest games of the year to Alabama fans. He saw that as an incredible indictment of the stature of the program, and he fired Phil Fulmer, hired Lane Kiffin. Tennessee has been a mess up until the last few years as they went through Lane Kiffin, then Derek Dooley, then Butch Jones, and then Jeremy Pruitt. Those four coaches all failed. Josh Heupel now, as the fifth hire, is starting to win. Why do I bring all that up? It's an incredible indictment of Ohio State's fan base faith in Ryan Day that tens of thousands of Ohio State fans, beyond a shadow of a doubt, chose to sell their seats to Tennessee fans. How do we know that? Because Tennessee was allotted, Adam, confirm that I'm correct in this, Tennessee was allotted only 3,500 seats for this game. Whatever number you want to attribute to Tennessee's fan base, and it's huge, 20, 25, 30, 35K, 40K, 20K, whatever number, tens of thousands, beyond a shadow of a doubt, were there. The vast majority of those tickets were bought from Ohio State season ticket holders, particularly those in the lower levels. That's a big deal, okay? Now, why did Ohio State fans sell the tickets? Because they're furious about the loss as a 3-touchdown favorite to Michigan. And I would submit to you, the reason why I picked Ohio State to win this game is I thought that they would come out with a completely new game plan and throw the ball all over the field, and they did. And so credit to Ohio State, they kicked Tennessee's ass. Tennessee's defensive line could get no pressure. The secondary did not match up well with the wide receivers. Game planning was elite. Tennessee on offense didn't have Dylan Sampson, was not able to run the football as consistently as they otherwise would have hoped to. And so Ohio State whipped Tennessee. But I actually think the Ohio State reaction to Tennessee is actually symptomatic of their inferiority complex right now, both with Jason Day as their head coach. Ryan Day. Jason Day probably, maybe he would have had a better game plan against Michigan. Ryan Day as their head coach, and also consistent ass kickings of Ohio State over the past 20 years by the SEC. By and large, when Ohio State has matched up against SEC teams over the past couple of decades, they've gotten waxed. Now, not in 2014 when they upset Alabama and won a national title. To be fair, I was there watching those games. But over time, consistently, Ohio State has failed to match up well with the SEC. That wasn't the case against Tennessee. Ohio State, I think, played their best game of the year, and I thought Tennessee, frankly, played the worst game they've played of the year, or at least the second worst. The performance against Arkansas was pretty atrocious. But even that performance against Arkansas, the defense wasn't as bad as they were against Ohio State. By the way, this is the Ohio State that people expected to see all season long. And they finally showed up and played at an incredibly elite level, and I give them credit for that. We'll see what happens. They're favored now against Oregon, as I was talking about earlier. If you're an Oregon Duck fan sitting back, you're like, wait a minute. Why are we the number 1 seed and playing by far the toughest team remaining by and large? We didn't get that good of a draw. Why couldn't we have gotten the Penn State draw? I think that's a very fair question that they could be asking. Also, by the way, Texas gets the win. They dominated on the line of scrimmage, over 100 yards rushing from 2 different playmakers there. So Texas gets the win. Early preview for you. And by the way, I did awful. I took underdogs. I think the other thing to take away here is home field advantage is real. And I believe that you should get rewarded. For people out there who think the regular season doesn't matter enough in college football, I think you should get rewarded, and you should play home field all the way through, just like the NFL does, until the championship game. Now, I understand we've got the bowl structure. For some reason they're trying to protect because politically they're afraid of not doing it. But I think the NFL actually has the right model here. Even though the games were not very competitive, I think the higher seeded team, in other words, I think that Georgia, I think that Oregon, I think that although they screwed it up, Arizona State and Boise State should not be higher seeded. If they had this right, Penn State, Texas, Georgia, and Oregon would all be hosting home playoff games this weekend. Now, I'm not going to throw the baby out with the bathwater. I've wanted a college football playoff for a long time. I'm happy with 12 playoff teams. I actually would prefer 16. But you have to have true seeding. You have to have actual reward. And by the way, when I say I would go to 16, that means I would eliminate the conference title games. I don't think there's very much interest, by and large, in the conference title games going forward. But I would seed 1 to 16, and that's the way that I would break it down. As of now, and I don't know that the numbers have come out on viewership yet. In fact, I have not seen them. And given the fact that tomorrow's Christmas Eve and then you got Christmas Day, it may take a while for them to come out. But ESPN is paying $1.3 billion for this college football playoff. I was texting with some friends who work in sports media, high-level sports media, and they're like, we don't even know who ESPN was bidding against. Nobody else was even in the same stratosphere as $1.3 billion. And you get the sense that ESPN knows they way overpaid because then they sold a couple of games back to TNT, but then ESPN had all of their talent doing the games, which frankly seemed very, very strange. And so ESPN has a lot of money invested here. In fact, they're going to lose a lot of money. One of the guys I was texting with said, other than the NBA deals, which look even more like a disaster right now than they did when they were signed in the offseason, given the continued collapse of the NBA ratings, they're saying, hey, this looks like the worst deal out there in sports. ESPN is going to lose a massive amount of money trying to cover this. Now, one more discussion point here. there now is a big battle internally at ESPN. During the end of the game, Kirk Herbstreit and Chris Fowler were discussing the Ohio State fan response to Ryan Day, and Herbstreit said something along the lines of, "We'll see what First Take says on Monday and whether they're still going to want to fire Ryan Day." I believe Stephen A. Smith said, and Adam, you can correct me on this if I'm wrong, I believe Stephen A. Smith said Ohio State should hire Deion Sanders, I think was what he said, that set off Kirby. And that will be somewhat interesting to we do have the overnights. Sorry, I'll get to this in a sec. Overnights, not good. In fact, some of them really bad. Overnights for the NFL versus college football. Steelers-Ravens, which aired on Fox, got a 7-6 share. Texans-Chiefs, which aired on NBC, got a 7-4 share. Those were Saturday games that aired. Tennessee-Ohio State, not surprisingly, the highest rated, got a 6.3 share. Indiana-Notre Dame, also on ABC, ESPN, 5.7 share. And then the TNT numbers are, frankly, really bad. Clemson, Texas, and SMU, Penn State, both bad. And I can't help but wonder, why would you not want to have the triple header all on ABC, ESPN on the Saturday? Because it would have led to a bigger number with Tennessee, Ohio State. So just looking at some of these numbers, eyeballing it roughly, ESPN can't be happy with these numbers. They'll try to spin it in a positive way. Maybe they'll make up for it with the 4 games that are coming up next week on New Year's Day. But right now, they can't be very happy with them. Circling back to the Kirk Herbstreit comments, Shannon Sharpe went on First Take and took a shot at Kirk Herbstreit and Chris Fowler and said, basically, if you guys take another shot at us, I'm really going to be unleashed or something like that. I don't understand this. It's perfectly within Kirk Herbstreit's rights to give his opinion that the opinion on First Take was ridiculous. And it's perfectly within Stephen A. Smith's rights to say, well, my opinion's better than your opinion, right? I mean, all we're doing is arguing over who has the more rational opinions, which is actually the very foundation of First Take. Now, I don't know if Kirk Herbstreit ever goes on as a guest on First Take. I know that Paul Feinbaum sometimes does. I honestly don't keep up with the show because I'm busy having to do my own prep and getting ready for my own show. But how is Shannon Sharpe upset at Herbstreit for sharing his opinion that the opinions on First Take are not good ones? You know, in other words, like, this was not some sort of personal attack. If Kirk Herbstreit had said, I think Stephen A. Smith and Shannon Sharpe do an awful job on television, and I'm embarrassed that we both work at the same company, that would be a pretty good attack, right? That would be a real attack, and I would understand if somebody felt compelled to try to defend themselves from that attack. Personally, I'm just saying, that's where I would come down on that. And you may have noticed this. Generally speaking, I don't fire in-house. I'll say, hey, I agree with that opinion. I don't agree with that opinion. But I don't believe you've ever seen me or heard me rip anybody at Fox Sports to the high heavens over their opinion. I might disagree with it. I might take another perspective. But I think that should be the general rule. Like, you shouldn't go after coworkers directly on a personal basis. And by and large, I don't think I've done that. And I don't think Kirk Herbstreit did it. All Herbstreit said was, hey, First Take wanted Ryan Day out. Now he has won a huge game, right? Winning a playoff game is a big deal. I wonder what they're going to say on First Take on Monday. It's actually kind of an advertisement for First Take. And so the idea that Shannon Sharpe would go on and huff and puff and be like, how dare you basically say something I don't like about First Take, I mean, he just disagreed with the opinion. So I don't know how much of this is show. I don't know how much of it is reality, but just FYI. Big news Couple of things I'm going to finish off with here. 2024, inevitably to all of this, by and large, we are seeing a massive growth. Here's what, by the way, what Shannon said. I'm going to be a good teammate. I'm going to let it slide. Everybody's at ESPN. Because had you not taken the route you've taken, I would have lit their asses up, Shannon Sharpe said to Stephen A. Smith. If we're going to be on the same team, if we're going to work for the same network, don't do that, Kirk. Here is all anyway, like, I think this is crazy. I don't think anybody did anything wrong. I think Shannon Sharpe is way overreacting. Go figure. But future here. News came out that I did not see get a ton of attention. The Women's World Cup, I believe it's in 2027 and 2031, it was announced will be moving to Netflix. Here is the reality. Anything that Netflix or Amazon wants, or for that matter, Apple wants, they're going to get. So if you work at CBS, if you work at ESPN, if you work at Fox, if you work at NBC, all of the rights that you hold are eventually going to move to streaming. It feels inevitable to me. These are multi-trillion-dollar companies. They can afford to lose quite a lot of money on the airing of these broadcasts. And again, you may have heard me talk about this from an advertising perspective. I think these networks, which have to share basically the same ads to everyone, are at a competitive disadvantage compared to Amazon or Netflix, who can know everything about you on an individual basis from a subscriber data. If you have young kids, if you have, if you are single, the things that they're going to advertise, if you're a retiree, the things that they are going to advertise to you are going to be different. And I don't think it's crazy to believe that an advertisement that's targeted directly to you, especially one that you could click through and buy in real time, can be worth 5 to 10 times as much to an advertiser as a larger broadcast network ad can. And so I don't even know that I disagree with the monetization of sports, given how hard it is to get big audiences. I think there is a strong argument, for instance, that Netflix is going to be able to make way more money off the Women's World Cup in the future than Fox can. And I think the same thing is true of the Super Bowl. Now, or the NFL playoffs, the college football playoffs. One challenge is, obviously, Netflix has to do a better job of streaming so that they can actually get everybody on to be able to watch the Jake Paul-Mike Tyson fight, or huge test for Netflix on Wednesday, is the broadcast going to work when it comes to the Christmas Day games? Or is it going to fail like it failed with Jake Paul and Mike Tyson? Big test to see how big the streaming audience is going to be. All right, I've got an article that's going to go up soon about my trip to Israel. Many of you have heard me talk about it. It will be the final big article that I will have up before the end of the year. I'll probably have some college football playoff and NFL Week 16, Week 17 gambling picks up before I head to Mexico on the day after Christmas. I'm going to try to get those up. I try to be honest with you guys about stocks that I buy. Longtime viewers of OutKick know that I have talked about buying stocks a lot over the years. I told you when I bought WWE stock, it's done phenomenally well. I told you when I bought Flutter, when I bought DraftKings, back in the day when I bought Penn. I try to be honest with you. Twitter stock back in the day, I told you when I bought it. I told you I bought Paramount. I told you I bought Fox. I have bought most of my money. I am not a licensed financial professional, okay? But based on all the research I have done, the smartest thing you can do with your investment decisions is buy S&P 500 index funds. That's what I do with like 90% of my assets. I buy S&P 500 index funds. Every 10 years, they should double. Leave them alone. Don't try and time the market. S&P 500 outperforms almost any possible individual who is managing your money. It outperforms likely you and your ability for what you are going to purchase. Having said that, you may be like me, and you may also like making decisions to hold some individual stocks. I bought and have bought Atlanta Braves stock. Okay, I believe it. Look, people say, okay, what stocks do you buy individually? It's when I think I understand, the media and the sports gambling universe better than your average person does because I work in those industries. You can agree or disagree with me on it. Right now, I think if you look at the valuations of many different professional sports franchises, they're continuing to go up substantially in the NFL in particular, but also the NBA, NHL, Major League Baseball. You can buy the stock in the Atlanta Braves. I think the Braves are worth twice what the Braves are selling for on the open market right now. I know nothing about whether they could ever be sold. I know nothing about the future of the Braves beyond my analysis, right? Here's what I would say. The Braves benefit from the fact that Major League Baseball has woefully underserved the southeastern part of the United States. That means that the Atlanta Braves are really the team of the SEC. Think about how crazy this is. There are more NHL franchises in the SEC footprint than there are Major League Baseball franchises. Bonkers. There are more NFL franchises in the SEC footprint than there are Major League Baseball franchises, and there's more NBA teams in the SEC footprint than there are Major League Baseball franchises. The Braves are the team of Mississippi, of Alabama, of Tennessee, of, to a large extent, South Carolina, and to a certain extent, North Carolina too. Okay? That's crazy. They have an incredibly lucrative footprint. Maybe Nashville and Charlotte are going to get teams going forward. I think that would be smart. Who knows? But right now, the Atlanta Braves SEC footprint, not to mention, obviously, they're the team of Georgia. Right now, they are incredibly valuable, and they have a multi-state footprint. I think in the future, when everything moves to streaming, that's going to be very, very lucrative. Point one. Point two, if you have been, like I have, to the Battery, the Braves own all the real estate surrounding the Battery, and they're continuing to expand and develop more of it. That is a gold mine. They don't just own their baseball stadium. They own all the hundreds of acres around it, restaurants, bars, hotels, business offices, office buildings. These are incredibly valuable assets that are all rolled in with the Braves. And number three, I've been saying this for a long time, sports franchises are basically like works of art. That is, a really rich guy wants to own a franchise, and oftentimes they're not worried. Look at Steve Cohen up in New York. They're not worried as much about the math as they are owning the asset. If the Dallas Cowboys are worth $10 billion, and I think they probably are, we know recently that the Philadelphia Eagles sold at a valuation of $8.3 billion, a private equity stake. The Washington Commanders sold recently for $6 billion. Right now, the Atlanta Braves, $2.5 billion-ish. I think if you combine the franchise and the surrounding community of assets, meaning the developable land, I think there's no doubt that the Braves are worth twice what the market value is, their market cap is right now, and maybe more than twice. But I feel very good about twice. I buy and hold stock long term. I'm not a financial advisor. If you want my advice as a newly rich man, relatively speaking, buy S&P 500 funds, put them away. Don't worry about it for the next couple of generations, and then check and see what the value is. You're going to do very well. But if you want individual stocks, I try to be as honest and transparent as possible. I'm buying Atlanta Braves stocks to buy and hold for a long time. All right. Go read that article up for me about Israel. I'm going to be talking to Kelly Stewart on the fade here shortly. DBAP, unless you need to SBAP. I'm Clay Travis, and this has been the final show of the 2024 year. Thank you so much for all your support of OutKick. 2024, best year of my professional career. Hopefully we can continue that in 2025. It's been a lot of fun. I'll be back to talk with all of you on January 2nd. Love you. Have fantastic Christmases, Hanukkahs, holiday season with all of your family. And thank you for all your support of OutKick. I'll see you on January 2nd.